please make your way to the aisles. There are two people with microphones that you can line up and do questions with. As a reminder, please keep your questions respectful. We also have only a limited amount of time with the governor, so please keep your questions brief and to the point. We ask that the media please refrain from asking questions so we can allow for a maximum number of audience members to participate by asking their questions. But first, I have some questions that I will ask the governor. We do. From our sponsors. And the first is brought to you by AARP. What would you do to address Social Security's financial shortfall and reform the program to put it on stable ground for future generations?
Well, first of all, I think the objective for any of the either the supplemental retirement system with Social Security or the entitlement programs is to preserve and protect it for those that have it now, and to prepare for the structural problems that we face because of our changing demography. So, look, if you're 67 years old, the contract needs to be fulfilled. But if you're 37, it won't be fulfilled because the costs of this, the change in Social Security is such that it's hard to imagine how it would work. I mean, think about it. We had 30 people working for one person that was retired in the 1950s. When the Social Security was created, people received benefits at 65 and life expectancy was 65. That wasn't a wild-eyed idea. That was pretty conservative. Now, thank goodness, we're all living longer. Our demography has changed. We're moving towards 3 people to 1, and ultimately we could get to 2 to 1 if there's no changes. So I think we need to continue to raise the retirement age for people that, you know, are not for people now, but for people that are moving forward. I don't know when you would start this, but similar to what happened in the 1980s. We're just now nearing the end of raising the retirement age to 67. I have in my tax plan, I've proposed that people that are working at the age of 67, and there are a lot of people that don't have the ability to retire completely, given the economic circumstances that they face, to not have to pay payroll taxes anymore. It would be a huge boost for elders, for seniors, to be able to keep that 6+% in their own family's budget. And I think we need to look at needs testing these programs over an extended period of time. There are solutions to Social Security that could protect it for more than a generation. And I think we need to find a way to create consensus for it to happen. Medicare is actually a bigger challenge because the cost drivers, underlying cost drivers of Medicare are health care, and we've not bent the cost curve with Obamacare. We still have health care inflation, if you will, that is higher than inflation for the rest of our budgets. And so reforming the underlying health care part of this has got to be a big, it's a challenge, but it needs to be done in concert with looking at Medicare and Medicaid and Obamacare, all of which are going to create out-year budgets, structural deficits that are just, they're huge. I mean, you can't ignore it. There are some that want to. They want to be in denial, or they think denial is a river in Africa. It isn't. Denial is a bad thing. And the longer we wait to solve these problems, the power of compounding is our enemy, not our friend.
Thank you. The next comes from the Des Moines Area Community College. Nationally, 32% of U.S. employers indicate that they have difficulty finding skilled employees, with as many as 3 million open positions at any one time. The greatest need is middle skill workers requiring more than a high school diploma, but no more than 1 to 2 years of community college or credentialing process. What would you do in your first 100 days as president to address the national middle skills worker shortage? And how would you incent and support more individuals to enter into training for the good jobs that are open?
This is a great question and completely accurate. 3 million skilled jobs unfilled. And what a tragedy when you see declining income and the skills gap creates, throughout this recovery, 3 million jobs unfilled. And it's the common thing you hear when you talk to small businesses and businesses in general is the inability to find quality workers. So the community college system can play a huge role in dealing with that gap. And I think they ought to be given much more leeway to innovate in that regard. In Florida, our community college system has done an incredible job at a significantly lower cost than the 4-year per student funding. And there should be outcome measures and there should be rewards for success. I think there ought to be bonuses for giving people AS degrees and AA degrees that immediately give them a chance to get a job. There should be rewards and incentives to do this. You know, if it's a 2-year degree, it should be done in 2 years. By the way, we can do that in higher education, the 4-year degrees as well. We measure 4-year degree completion in 6 years. Full-time equivalent students, 6 year, why don't we call it a 6-year degree? God forbid. If we were, college attainment today is lower than it was. We were one in the country, one in the world since World War II for a long while. Now we're not, now we're 15th. And so I think there needs to be a reform across the board. Our training programs, accelerating the certificate, access to certificates. Community colleges, I don't think need as much reform because they've always been the community-based, lower cost, higher output provider in the whole spectrum of learning. And so there are ways that we can accelerate this. I think businesses can play a bigger role. Sometimes I've noticed that community colleges and centers of higher learning are a little reluctant to have too much private sector involvement. But in fact, it's called a community college for a reason, right? It's community. And the community, serving the community is to deal with this skills gap. Final thing I'll say is, I don't know how many of the myriad of job training programs that exist nationally, but this is an opportunity time to bring our job training into the 21st century. We have mid-20th century training programs that aren't delivering. We spend a lot of money, and there are a lot of people working in the programs to train people, but not many people are getting trained for real jobs. So I think this is an opportunity to create community-based solutions where you start, if communities want to try something different, we ought to allow for the block granting of the monies that go to the 55 separate job training programs or something like that. Push this to the communities and forge consensus there. I bet you that this partnership that you have in working with your stakeholders could come up with a far better way to deal with the skills gap than people stuck in the Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. I'll put my money on you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
That's a low bar, but
We'll still take it.
You can whoop them.
And then our final sponsor question is from Microsoft. Congress is currently considering how law enforcement can access emails, photos, and other communications stored in the cloud, both in the U.S. and abroad. Should personal information stored digitally have the same legal protections as the same information stored in your home? If U.S. law enforcement can get personal information on citizens of other countries stored digitally abroad, as they claim they can do, other countries may demand the personal data of Americans stored in the U.S. Doesn't that infringe on the rights of U.S. citizens?
It can. And I think we have to develop a thoughtful response to the balance of protecting the homeland. This question relates to private citizens that have no nexus to any national security issues. And so if it's purely a privacy issue, I think there needs to be protections, for sure. Similar to what we have, as was suggested, of personal privacy rights in one's home. You have to go through, there has to be a well-founded basis to be able to identify personal information, whether it's tangible or digital, for sure. The bigger issue, I think, the bigger conflict is, how do we protect the homeland? How do we protect privacy rights for American citizens that have done nothing wrong, but also deal with the fact that there are evildoers out there that want to destroy the country? I mean, when ISIS describes their primary motivation to put the black flag of ISIS on the White House, you can just discount that and say, oh, they're not serious, or you can take them seriously because that's in fact what they want. And they murder innocents. A Christian can't live in Syria or Iraq right now. Mosul used to be a place where for 1,400 years Mass was administered, no longer. I mean, we're living in a really perilous time, and to be naive, to not think that there's an effort to try to undermine our freedoms and to create a larger caliphate, I think is naive. So I would hope we could find a proper balance between personal liberty and protecting the homeland. I don't think the reauthorization of the Patriot Act did that, in all honesty. And then the final part of this, Europe's, because of the Snowden deal and the leaks that occurred prior to that, the Manning case, all these things have created real mistrust between the United States technology companies and the Europeans. And frankly, I think Europe is also concerned that we dominate these fields, that we have such a advanced technological sector that they're, maybe I'm cynical, but I think they're also using this fear of privacy as a way to also stall out the tremendous advantage that our technology companies have. So this requires full engagement. I mean, this is work in progress. There could be real damages done if Europe follows through with basically cordoning off information by country. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of the cloud and its benefits to be able to cure diseases, to create more productivity, to create better benefits to consumers and all the things that it brings.
Thank you. Now we'll open it up for questions. I know there's several of you.
We'll only be here for about 5 hours.
We're going to start on this side and we'll alternate back and forth as best we can.
I'll try to get to yes, no.
All right, thank you, Governor. My name is Kelly Sawyer with Every Child Matters in Iowa. And on a past visit to Iowa, actually Council Bluffs, I was over there, and you had referenced Robert Putnam and Charles Murray.
I did.
And they basically talking about if you are born poor, you are more likely to stay poor. If you are born wealthy, more likely to stay wealthy. As president, what specific policies or solutions do you have to close the opportunity gap so all children have that same right to reach the American dream?
It's not a cliche to say what was just repeated, and both the left and the right, at least those that have studied this, and Murray and Putnam are probably two leading social scientists in this regard. We're sticky at the ends. If you're born wealthy, increasingly you're stuck, fortunately for you, at the higher end. If you're born poor, sadly, you're stuck at the bottom. And the middle's getting squeezed. So that's the great challenge of our country. In fact, it's not a question of income inequality, it's more of a question of social and economic mobility. And the single biggest thing that I think we can do, there's a lot of things that we can do. Safe communities would be helpful. Making sure that all the government programs are focused on not destroying, hurting family life, but actually strengthening it. Many of the transfer payment programs actually require two-parent families not to exist. I mean, there's things that we need to adjust and be serious about looking at to bring these programs into the 21st century. But a quality education is definitely the biggest tool that the biggest role that government can play in dealing with the gap that exists that you described. And I think that needs to be bottom up rather than top down. But if for example, in Florida, we have the highest participation rate in early childhood literacy programs of any state in the country. 144,000 kids go to literacy-based half-day four-year-old programs. It could be better, and I hope it does get better. It could be more focused on literacy-based. We should really make sure that we're constantly striving to improve. But 75 to 80% of all four-year-olds go to those programs in Florida. Other states are way behind. And we've had the greatest gains in learning in the K-5 system of any state in the country. In fact, Florida is in the top 3 or 4 for a state that has 57 to 58% of its kids qualified for free and reduced lunch. It works. It works if you make it a priority. The federal government needs to be a partner in that. So they have, back to the job training deal, I don't know, it's 50 plus programs. Early childhood education, the same thing. Why not be a partner to create strategies? If this partnership in the Chamber of Commerce and all the affiliated organizations say in Des Moines that we're going to make sure that every four-year-old has at least a half day, maybe even more, of literacy-based learning. Voluntary, it's not forced, but voluntary. And you brought the resources to bear to make that happen. Why shouldn't the federal government be a partner to provide their money without strings attached? That's where I think we need to get. Not an example of what you're describing, but a community-based solution. In Houston, Texas, people were outraged that veterans were homeless, wandering the streets of downtown Houston. It's heartbreaking. If it happens here, it shouldn't happen. They need to get access to mental health issues. They need a Veterans Administration that's totally focused on them. There's lots of things they can do. Well, the Houston Partnership, a version of like this, I believe, isn't that right? I mean, the same kind of group. They created a strategy to eliminate homelessness, and they did it. That's the way to do this. And I think the federal government needs to just, chill out a little bit in terms of their rules and how they do it. It's got to be top down and focus on ways to use the leverage that they have. It's typically resources to be able to bring it to bear to create homegrown strategies that really matter.
Good morning, Governor Bush.
Good morning.
My name is John Olson, and I was wondering, where do you stand on the Voting Rights Act? Do you believe it should be reauthorized? If not, why not?
Reauthorize, you said?
Yes.
I think that if it's to reauthorize it to continue to provide regulations on top of states as though we were living in 1960, because those were basically when many of those rules were put in place, I don't believe that we should do that. There's been dramatic improvement in access to voting. I mean, exponentially better improvement. And I don't think there's a role for the federal government to play in most places. Could be some, but in most places where they did have a constructive role in the 60s. So I don't support reauthorizing it as is.
Hi, Governor Bush. Thank you for being here today. Based on your experience with education in Florida, how do you plan on applying those skills at the federal level, making larger changes to the whole nation, necessarily or specifically looking at education standards?
So, the federal government should play no role in the creation of standards, content, or curriculum. That's not their proper place. It's just inappropriate to do that. But the power of the president is to convene. So, look, I'm not going to go crazy on you, but I'm really passionate about this. The whole debate about education is misguided. It's on the wrong subject. The real subject is this economic and social mobility question, where if you're born poor, you're likely to stay poor. And we think that education is working in our own communities, in our own families and the like, but it really isn't if you measure it compared to who we should be measuring it to, which is the rest of the world. And the challenge is that a third of our kids are college and or career ready. Let that pause, just meditate on that. We spend more per student than any country in the world other than Belgium and Luxembourg or something like that, literally 2 or 3 countries. And we get that result. I'm not kidding. I'm serious about this. A third. No one should be doing high fives with 2/3 of our kids either not graduating from high school or graduating from high school but then going to Des Moines Community College and being told, sorry, you're going to have to redo high school math and high school reading. That's not acceptable. That's where the skills gap started. That's why we have 3 million people that aren't finding jobs. It's one of the key reasons. And so the President of the United States needs to create a sense of urgency about how we change this. It shouldn't be a top-down driven plan, but there are lots of ways the federal government could play a role in partnering for real reform. I mentioned one, early childhood education. How about children with learning disabilities? 500,000 kids in Florida have learning disabilities of some kind. They get additional funding, but they have the worst outcomes altogether. More money, less results. Well, we created a voucher program for kids with learning disabilities. 30,000 kids go to private schools because their mom or dad did not believe their individual education plan is being met, unilaterally. The net effect was that kids in public school have had the greatest learning gains. Kids with learning disabilities in public schools in Florida have led the nation on the nation's report card. All schools get better when you empower parents to have choices. Why not provide IDEA money, the federal monies, to go for reform-oriented states that have the courage to tear up the monopolies? Why not do the same as it relates to low-income kids? We have the largest corporate tax scholarship program in the country with 75,000, 80,000 kids going to private schools. Low-income kids, their parents want to go to a better school. The school that they were in was not acceptable to them. If you're rich, you can go to a private school, no big deal. If you're poor, you're stuck. Why not have the federal government be a partner to disrupt the order there? There's lots of ways that the federal government can play a role, and then the power of convening. There are so many successful, high-performing schools across the spectrum of life in this country, but they're marginalized because monopolies don't go quietly into the night. I don't know if you've noticed. They just don't respond to, there's no sense of urgency when you know next year everybody's going to have to go to the same school they were going to before. There's roles to play as it relates to teacher preparation. There's a lot of things the federal government can do, but it shouldn't lead the charge. It should be a partner in a bottom-up kind of approach. And Florida would take that money in a heartbeat, and it would improve the quality of education and access to education for thousands and thousands of more kids. Just to remind you, we were at the bottom, 50th out of 50 in graduation rate. We're now at the national average, more or less. in 15 years' time. We've had improvement every year. Our kids were 29th out of 31 on the NAEP test, the Nation's Report Card Test in 4th grade reading. 10 years after I turned the system upside down, we were 6th out of 50 states. Low-income kids are number 1 in the country in Florida. Hispanic kids do two grade levels ahead of their counterparts in the country. You can do this, but it needs to be state and locally driven.
I think this is going to have to be our last question right over here.
Hi, former governor. I'm a sophomore in Des Moines Area Community College. When your Republican colleague, Mr. Rubio, announced running for president, he said, just yesterday, a leader from yesterday began the campaign for president by promising to take us back to yesterday. He said, but yesterday is over. We are never going back. I know who he was addressing, but if
It
you're...
was Hillary Clinton.
But if you're elected president, what opportunities would be created for this young generation to keep steering the United States as a leader in the world in the 21st century?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And look, if you go to jeb2016.com website, and you'll see the most detailed forward-leaning future plans that any president's laid out, whether it's tax policy or regulatory policy, immigration policy. I wrote a book about it that's forward-leaning. Across the spectrum, if you look at the policies that we've laid out, you're going to get a sense that this is about the future, not the past in my campaign. Here's the deal. We've had a president who was gifted. He's gifted. I mean, I'm envious of how good of a speech he can give. He's very eloquent, and it's very powerful. But there was nothing in his background that would suggest that he could lead. There was nothing that suggested, well, he did this, this, and this, and therefore he can take complex problems, bring people together, fix them, stick with it, create a strategy to improve on it, and build on it, and build on it, which is what leadership is all about. I have those proven skills. My campaign is about the future, but I have proven skills that people can take to the bank, that I have the skills to transform, to disrupt, to create a strategy, to transform, to stick with it, to be passionate and totally committed to fighting for the people that right now are stuck. And I think when you get closer and closer to this, it's going to matter. That experience matters. That commitment on behalf of people matters. And lofty platitudes are not going to be as relevant as direct, sincere plans and the heart to be able to fix things and the leadership skills that are proven. So I'm a friend of Marco's. I'm a huge fan of his. I got to work with him. He got to work with me. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. When I was governor, he's an incredible talent. But we're in times right now that I think requires leadership, and that's my case. And I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to run hard, and I appreciate if anybody is excited about this, and I hope you are. February 1st on a Monday evening. It'll only be, heck, I'm hoping it'll get to 32 or something. I hope you'll show up and support me in the caucuses here. We'd love to have your help. And thank you all very much for allowing me.